Beginning in April, I have spun yarn steadily for 3 straight weeks, except on the Sabbath. I've completed 74 skeins of yarn for a total of more than 40,000 yards of material.
In soft water makes the strongest and brightest yellow dye, but saffron makes a fine straw color. Yarrow, onion skins, barberry bush, or peach leaves will answer pretty well.
When you finish your fabric, you may glaze it with egg white or beeswax to hold the light and make them shine. This will also hold out dirt.
The true economy of housekeeping is simply the art of gathering up all the fragments so that nothing be lost. I mean the fragments of time as well as materials.
I learned my letters in a few days, standing by Aunt Hannah's knee while she pointed them out with a pin, skipping from them to words of 2 syllables, and thence taking a flying leap into the New Testament. My sister Lydia and I had our stint, so much work to do every day before we could go outside and play.
New England children, like Lucy Larcom, were apprenticed early to the householder's tasks. By the time she was 5, Lucy knew everything about making and sewing fabric. She learned how to repair worn-out cloth by making samplers of darning stitches. New England women made everything by hand. They even called their homes manufactories.
I think it must have been at home that I got the idea the chief end of woman was making clothing for mankind. I lifted up my eyes from my father's heels one morning and mused, how tall he is. How many thousand stitches there must be in his coat and pantaloons. And I suppose I have got to grow up and have a husband and put all those stitches into his coat and pantaloons. Oh, I never can do it.
Lucy grew up in a small Massachusetts whaling village. Her father was a captain on a whaling ship and stamped his logbook when whales were sighted. He was sometimes at sea a year or more.
The sea was our nearest neighbor. Almost every home had its sea tragedy. I remember how my mother watched for my father at the window of our old home.
Women made something beautiful. They did not know if their husbands would ever come back. They followed them to sea with quilt patterns that mirrored the unknown waters. Mariner's compass, ocean waves, world without end. Ship of life. One woman inscribed these words on her quilt with indelible ink. The great ship of life, gliding over the sea of time, bound to the shore of eternity, her anchor cast on the rock of ages.
A child does not easily comprehend even the plain fact of death.
Lucy was 10 years old when her father died. Her mother was left with 8 children to support and few choices in the world. So the widow Larkham moved her family up the Merrimack River to the new mill town of Lowell, where her children could find work in the mills.
On Monday morning when she comes in, she hangs up her coat on the highest pin, turns around just to greet her friends, crying, "Hi."
Lucy was 11 when she became a doffer in the mill.
I did not want to be a burden to anybody, so I went to work with a light heart. It was my task, with the other girls, to change bobbins on the spinning frames.
The mill girls came from farms all over New England to run the machines that replaced the work they used to do at home. The mills promised cash wages and broadened horizons, and the girls' days were now given over to the clock.
And she helps her daughters at every frame. Fall right, fall right, fall right, fall right.
Since I have wrote you, another payday has come around. I earned $14.50.
The folks think I get along just first rate.
The thought that I'm living on no one is a happy one indeed.
Don't
to
I
me.
feel independent of
It
everyone?
feels so good to send another dollar home and know I am helping my poor mother.
I have never worked so hard in my life, but perhaps I shall get used to it.
The mill girls were working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. But by the 1830s, there was too much cloth on the market and prices dropped. The mill owners cut wages and increased the operating speed of the looms. Girls like Lucy worked twice as hard for less pay.
I am very tired, and it seems to me as though cotton wool was in my ears all day.
I have never felt so used up
The
as
noise
now.
of the machinery, the noise of the machinery. I have discovered that I could accustom myself to the noise so that it became like silence to me. I defied the machinery to make me its slave. It seems to me that going home is where I wish to be every day.
One mill girl wrote about her quilts in the Lowell Offering, a literary magazine published by the factory girls.
How I prize my album patchwork. To me, it is a bound volume of hieroglyphs, each of which is a key to some painful or pleasant memory. I remember one fragment in particular. It was a delicate sea moss pattern, a fragment of a dress belonging to my dead sister. When I looked at it, I always saw her face before me.
The mill girls wove two kinds of cloth at Lowell. One, a cotton calico used for dresses and quilts, and the other, a rough, sturdy fabric, slave cloth, which was shipped south to clothe the slaves. In the 1830s, women simply did not speak in public. So when Angelina Grimke, a Quaker abolitionist from South Carolina, spoke at Lowell, the mill girls turned out in droves to listen.
I recognize no rights but human rights. This is part of the great doctrine of human rights and can no more be separated from emancipation than the light from the heat of the sun. The rights of slave and woman blend like the colors of the rainbow.
The mill girls added their names to the thousands of signatures on a petition to abolish slavery. After 10 years in the mill, Lucy left to become a teacher and writer.
I weave the livelong day. I weave to win my daily bread. But ever as I weave, the world of women haunteth me. Afar, by sunnier streams, my sisters toil with foreheads black. Their shame, their sorrow I endure. The blot they bear is on my name. Dark women, slaving, in the South.
Hey, baby, hey, oh, hey, baby.
I was but a child myself, only 4 years old when duty transferred me from the rude cabin to the household of my master. It was my task to take care of Mistress's new baby.
Elizabeth Keckley was a house slave on a Virginia plantation. Her mother worked as a sewing slave and helped the mistress make quilts. Quilts made by house slaves were passed down for generations as heirlooms in the master's family. Elizabeth Keckley's master was also her father, and she was property of the family, just like the quilts her mother sewed. Black and white hands stitched these bed quilts side by side, but the intimacy the women shared depended on silence. On the face of things, Southern quilts spoke of a life of leisure and refinement. Time, endless amounts of time, were needed to applique their elaborate designs. One woman appliqued a portrait of Charleston, South Carolina in fastidious detail. Her quilt showed the elegant port city supported by the cotton economy. While Southern women's quilts presented the appearance of gracious gentility, in reality, many Southern women worked very hard and even managed the plantations when their husbands were away.
I have 70 bales of cotton prepared, and am hauling them as fast as possible to the river to ship for New Orleans.
Most slave women worked all day in the fields like the men, tending and picking cotton. Slaves were not allowed to speak their native language, and their own religions were banned. But the music they played and the patterns women appliqued on their own quilts were African, in rhythm and design.
Mother worked in the fields all day and pieced quilts at night. Us and the white folks, too. I've never seen how my mother stand such hard work.
First time I seen me bow weaver, he's sitting on
I can hear them spinning wheels now, turning around and saying, hear the slaves singing while they spinning. One Rachel knew every kind of root, bark, leaf, and berry that made red, blue, green, whatever color she wanted. When she hung them hanks up on the line in the sun to dry, it was every color of the rainbow.
Well, if I'm asking much, for some meat and me.
Slave quilts were pieced together from bits of worn-out clothing and elegant scraps from the mistress. Most wore out with hard use. A slave might be allotted only one blanket every 3 years, so quilts were a necessity. But beauty was as powerful a necessity as warmth in the slave's life.
The sun went off to a small spot, and then to darkness.
Harriet Powers transformed her memories of life as a slave into a visionary quilt, using the West African applique tradition of her people. She left us in her own words the story of each square.
Jonah cast overboard of the ship and swallowed by a whale. Turtles. The falling of the stars on November 13th, 1833. The people were frightened and thought that the end of time had come. God's hand stayed the stars. The varmints rushed out of their beds. Cold Thursday. A woman frozen while at prayer. The angels of wrath and the 7 vials. Bob Johnson and Kate Bell of Virginia. Rich people who were taught nothing of God. They had entered everlasting punishment. The independent hog ran 500 miles from Georgia to Virginia.
The independent hog, Powers described, was a code word for an escaped slave. Thousands of slaves risked imprisonment, torture, and death when they ran away from their masters. Free blacks and sympathetic whites had organized the Underground Railroad, really networks of safe houses where a slave might hide. They say quilts were hung on the clotheslines to signal that a house was safe for a runaway slave. Harriet Tubman, a 30-year-old field slave, escaped with her brothers on the Underground Railroad from a Maryland plantation.
There was one thing I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man would take me alive.
After 2 days, Tubman's brothers turned back. Harriet continued on to Philadelphia and freedom. Abolitionists made Underground Railroad quilts to reflect in geometric patterns the pathways and tracks on a slave's treacherous journey north. As women stitched these patterns, they linked themselves to the slave's flight and to the anti-slavery cause. Quilts were now a form of non-violent protest. Deliver me from the oppression of man. Jacob's Ladder. Underground Railroad. North Star. Once in the North, Harriet Tubman did not rest. She returned 19 times to bring out her whole family and over 300 slaves. No one knows how many slaves escaped with the help of people like Tubman. Perhaps 100,000 or more. Women sold quilts and needlework to raise money for the abolition cause. They inked their needle cases with the inscription, "May the use of our needles prick the conscience of the slaveholder." Elizabeth Keckley, now a grown woman, supported her master's entire indigent family with her needlework. forced by a white man. She had borne a light-skinned son when she was 16.
Why should my son be held in slavery? I would rather work my fingers to the bone, bend over my sewing till the film of blindness gathered in my own eyes.
When she proposed to buy both herself and her son, Keckley's master had the legal right to refuse. But she borrowed $1,200 from her clients and became one of a small number of slaves who were allowed to purchase their freedom. She and her son moved north to Washington, D.C. Elizabeth Keckley's reputation as a seamstress helped her find work as a dressmaker for Mary Todd Lincoln. She sewed in the White House while the South seceded from the Union and raised the Confederate flag at Fort Sumter. President Lincoln called for troops and predicted a 6-week war. Elizabeth Keckley's own son enlisted in the Union Army.
For the gay and happy soldier, we're contented as a dove. But the man who will not enlist never can gain our love.
Women of the North and South sent a part of themselves off to battle. They made quilts of hearts and hands for husbands, sons, and sweethearts, and they inscribed them with patriotic messages, like talismans.
God bless the brave who go to save our country in her dark, dreaded hour of danger.
In every object that I see, some of my friends seem to point at me. Love of friends can never cease in time of war and time of peace.
Men spring to arms faster than the mills can manufacture. To relieve this pressing necessity, contributions are urged from the stores of families. Women, we ask you to go house to house and store to store. The troops in the field need blankets and bedding and flannel shirts.
Neither North nor South could clothe the sudden ranks of soldiers. So the governments called on the women for help. And the women responded, transforming sewing circles and church groups into war aid societies. Almost overnight, they turned out masses of clothing, quilts, and bandages. They even sold their precious heirloom quilts to raise money for more materials and supplies.
Hurrah for the homespun dresses we Southern ladies wore in time of war. Every piece here, sad memories it brings back to me. For our hearts were weary and restless, and our life was full of care. The burden laid upon us seemed greater than we could bear.
The war had cut the South off from northern textile mills. Soon, cloth could not be purchased at any price. Women turned to their mothers and grandmothers and house slaves to relearn how to spin and weave their own fabric. But they could not keep up with the demand for clothing.
We pass no idle moments. We all wear homemade. Annie and Lizzie do the spinning and weaving. I do the bleaching, warping, knitting.
Spinning and weaving went on all through the war. The homemade cloth wore like leather. I wore linsey dresses. The goods wove for Negro wear.
Yarn is our circulating medium. It is the current coin of the realm. Mrs. Glover traded off a Negro woman for yarn.
I knitted a pair of socks a day as long as the war lasted. I do not know when I have seen a woman without knitting in her hand. Socks for soldiers is the cry.
Confederate women improvised uniforms from whatever was at hand. Each Southern village sent its soldiers to the battlefield in a different style of dress. In the north, generals assessed enemy troops from above in aerial reconnaissance balloons. Desperate to keep up, a group of Confederate women ripped up the last of their silk ball gowns and contributed them to make a patchwork balloon of many colors. The balloon was captured by the North, and the South continued to fall behind. With the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, President Lincoln freed the slaves. Elizabeth Keckley commemorated the slaves' liberation with a quilt made from elegant silk dress scraps, a Liberty Eagle in the center. In a massive feat of organization, Northern women formed the United States Sanitary Commission. In New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Chicago, they held huge fairs that raised millions of dollars for the Union. Quilts and needlework were a main attraction. The commission distributed clothing and food to men on the front lines and supervised conditions in makeshift hospitals. Meticulous records kept by the Sanitary Commission show that the New York branch alone sent 26,000 quilts to the front. One northern woman followed the war battle by battle, inscribing her quilt with the name and date of the 47 battles her husband fought and survived. Harriet Tubman nursed the sick and wounded on the Union front.
I'd go to the hospital every morning. First man I'd come to, I'd thrash away the flies and they'd rise like bees around a hive. Then I'd begin to bathe the wounds. By the time I'd get to the next man, the flies would be round the first, black and thick as ever.
"4 years later, the war was over. When the Southern troops surrendered at Appomattox, the soldiers were barefoot, their clothes hung in rags. One woman made a quilt from remnants of Confederate uniforms. In Alabama alone, 80,000 widows mourned. Elizabeth Keckley had lost her only son. She was still Mrs. Lincoln's seamstress and confidant.
I saw Mrs. Lincoln for a moment. She was to attend the theater that night with the president. There was great rejoicing throughout the North. But scarcely had the fireworks ceased to play when the lightning flashed the news over the magnetic wires. Mr. Lincoln shot. Never was joy so violently contrasted with sorrow. Every house draped in black.
Nashville, Tennessee, May 1865. My dear cousin, I do not write often now, not for want of something to say, but because I fear I am becoming a sad-souled woman, embittered by years of hardship and sorrow. I set out mignonette and petunias on the borders. I am as fond of flowers as ever. It is one trait of civilization left after the hardening, barbarizing influence of the horrid war.
New Lebanon, Ohio. My dear Virginia, I always feel so anxious when I do not hear from you. I planted the honeysuckle you sent me near the locust trees so that every time I walk to the barn I pass it and think of you. I started a box of flower slips, the best I could do for you.
After the war was over, thousands of immigrants and settlers made new lives on the Midwestern prairies. As they built their quilts block by block, women helped build homes and communities.
The settlers decided to build a community hall, one that had a real shingle roof. Everyone was willing to help.
Working with the simple quilt block log cabin, women created hundreds of variations. By rearranging the light and dark strips, they made light and dark, double light and dark, barn raising, straight furrow, courthouse steps, pineapple, windmill blades, streak of lightning,
This evening, just at dark, the sky looked perfectly frightful. It has been ablaze with lightning ever since. The wind is blowing so hard it shakes the house and rocks the windmill.
I went to Mrs. Lowe's quilting. There was 15 to quilt. Had 2 quilts, and there was indeed many merry faces about them.
Friendships had a way of growing as women worked together to finish a quilt. As they stitched, they talked out their lives and problems.
We ladies should be very proud. Through our efforts of selling signatures on our quilt, we have purchased 150 volumes as the beginning of a free library.
We are to present each member with an album quilt with all our names when we are married. Susie Daggett says she's never going to be married, but we must make her a quilt all the same.
Yesterday, Sarah Ann had a chill. Mrs. Anthony advised we send her to bed and give her a sweat. Then Jamaica Ginger once an hour. She's much better today.
I will give you some scraps if you would like to have them, for a few more scraps of print. You need not buy any. I would much prefer the scraps left from garments.
I have such good news. We have a little Jersey calf 4 weeks old. I'm so proud of having a Jersey cow in prospect.
I rose about 5, had an early breakfast, got my housework done about 9, baked 6 loaves of bread, made a kettle of mush, had a suet beef boiling, and managed to put my clothes away and set my house in order. May the merciful Lord be with me. 9:00 p.m. I was delivered of another son.
My husband took me to town last week to buy a yard of red cloth, but he bought me a whole bolt of it to cheer me up. I consider the inventor of the turkey red cotton dyes the greatest benefactor of all the dry goods crew. The purity and brightness of the color and its durability both under soap and sun and its cheapness in the purchase make it to my mind a thing of beauty and a joy forever. What's more refreshing to the eye and through the eye to the inner sense than a bit of turkey red?
The building and the hard work had been done. With a flood of European immigrants, the Midwest was a settled region by 1876. Jubilant about its future, the whole country celebrated its first centennial. If Midwesterners felt crowded or pinched or adventurous, there were still other frontiers, further west.
My mother's memory, added to my own experience as a pioneer pathbreaker, led me to dedicate my life to the enfranchisement of women. As I look back over so many receded years, I recall so much that is worthy of record.
Born in a log cabin in Illinois, Abigail Scott Duniway was the second of 12 children. In 1852, Abigail and her family joined a river of settlers, the largest migration in American history. Abigail's mother pleaded with her husband not to uproot their family, but he was determined to take up free land in Oregon.
Ah, the tears that fell upon these garments, the heartaches that were stitched and knotted and woven into them as relatives and friends of a lifetime dropped away.
Leaving tomorrow in 4 wagons. I'm taking all my feather beds and quilts, 50 bushels of corn, 500
Beneath
pounds
the folded
of
quilts in the wagon, we hid the bags of gold and silver, lest the Indians try to steal them.
The top of our house wagon was lined with thick comforts to make it impervious to wind and weather.
I took my little chair of sugar maple wood, a chest of books, calicos bought during the Revolutionary War, which I used to make my quilts.
Sugar, rice, flour, pots and pans, a wash tub of little trees, plus Mother, a good fat sister, self, 2 children, and all my patchwork.
Abigail was 17 years old when her father gave her the task of keeping the family journal on the Overland Trail.
April 2, 1852, leaving home. April 30, we are now prairie. Blue-tinged timber in the distance, wild flowers at our feet. Made 20 miles today. The cold wind blowed disagreeably through our wagons all day and made us willing to walk most of the time to keep warm. The tribe of Indians that occupy this territory are called Sioux. It is thought if emigrants use proper precautions, they need fear nothing.
Women who looked closely at the tribes they passed were struck by the bold geometric designs that blazed across objects of daily life.
When I see the baskets Indian women trade with one another, I am reminded of my own mother's quilts.
Later, these designs would influence pioneer women in their own work. The journey had plunged women into the unknown. The trail embedded itself so deeply in their minds that they would never forget. Indian teepee, prairie sun, cactus basket, feathered star, Rocky Mountain Road.
June 5, made 20 miles today, camped near the river, passed 4 graves. June 8, passed 8 fresh graves, here of considerable sickness in great many trains. Met a company who had started back on account of illness and death.
Farewell, my friends, I'm bound for Canaan. I'm traveling through the wilderness.
The trail itself developed a sawtooth edge, worn by thousands of feet going off the side to read the grave markers.
Who doth leave my mind distressed? I go away behind you.
Abigail's mother was stricken with cholera along the Platte River.
June 21. Our mother was taken about 2 o'clock this morning. A wearied spirit took flight, and then we realized we were bereaved indeed. We buried her wrapped in a blanket in a shallow grave by the side of the road. In the outskirts of the basin, clusters of wild roses and other flowers grow in abundance.
Abigail and her sisters walked on, barefoot, for 6 more weeks, until they reached the lush Willamette Valley in Oregon. Pine tree. Log cabin. Dove at the window. Wedding ring. A year after she arrived, Abigail married a young rancher named Ben Dunaway, and they hacked a farm she called Hardscrabble out of the dark Oregon woods. Abigail raised a large family, and in the midst of her farm chores somehow found the time to write, and published a novel about her own experiences on the Overland Trail.
My advice to who may read these pages is, do not yield to difficulties, but rise above discouragements.
After 10 years of struggle on their homestead, Abigail's husband Ben co-signed a bad loan and they lost the farm. Not long afterwards, he was badly injured, and Abigail was left with 4 children and her husband to support. In 1866, with no property of her own and few choices, she turned to her needlework skills to make a living. She borrowed money and opened a millinery store.
My millinery business flourished reasonably well in a financial way, but the lessons it taught were of far greater value than dollars and cents.
On a buying trip to San Francisco, Dunaway met Susan B. Anthony, one of the leaders of the National Woman's Suffrage Movement. Abigail was exposed to radical new ideas. The suffragists were speaking about the plight of thousands of immigrant women and children sewing piecework for starvation wages. Suffrage leaders rejected sewing as a symbol of women's oppression. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. As the country moved boldly forward into the machine age, a new leisured class of women made the same journey in a few days that had taken Dunaway 6 months in a covered wagon. The quilts these women made broke into a dizzying array of fragments. They called them crazy quilts.
We have quite discarded in our modern quilts the regular geometric designs once so popular. Now we are very daring. We go boldly forward without any apparent design at all.
For some women who stayed at home, quilts were an acceptable channel for creative expression, and they pushed the quilt form in new directions. Other women ordered their quilt patterns from ladies' magazines, bought the fabric pre-cut, and made quilts by formula. Suffrage leaders urged all women of leisure to put away their needles and take up the cause of women's rights.
We have served our apprenticeship at washing, patching, quilting, darning, ironing, and plain sewing. Now we propose to edit and publish a newspaper.
In 1871, Abigail Duniway sold her millinery shop, borrowed $3,000, and with the help of her family began to publish a newspaper, The New Northwest. She opposed the prescriptions of the popular women's magazines.
The parlor is the face of the house. Its character demands a richer style of furnishing and a more fastidious taste than is required with other rooms.
The sewing machine, mass-produced and marketed as a labor-saving device, did save time. But many women used it to add more ruffles and frills to clothing patterned after models in the ladies' magazines. And they filled up their time with elaborate home decoration.
Women can have immense power if they stay at home. It is praiseworthy to be a wife and mother, civilizer and beautifier.
In the New Northwest, Duniway offered an alternative analysis.
We see, under existing customs of society, 1/2 the women are overtaxed and underpaid, hopeless yet struggling toilers in the world's drudgery, while the other women are frivolous, idle, and expensive. Both these conditions are wrong.
It never occurred to me that I ought to know housework and do it. I knew all the carpenter's tools and handled them, made carts and sleds, but a needle and a dishcloth I never could abide.
Frances Willard's mother believed that a child must follow her own nature. Her daughter, she knew, had a destiny quite out of the ordinary.
I was born to a fate. I was to become a wanderer on the face of the earth. Women were to become my comrades, gathered far and near in the loyal Temperance Legion.
Early in the century, reformers had taken up the temperance cause. It was women who bore the brunt of the domestic violence that resulted from the abuse of alcohol. Their a spontaneous crusade by the women of Hillsboro, Ohio in 1873. The women, spurred by a temperance lecture, marched into taverns and prayed on their knees.
Women like, they took their knitting, their zephyr work, or their embroidery and swarmed into the drink shops. They became an army, drilled and disciplined.
Within a month, the women of Ohio had closed 3,000 taverns. Frances Willard soon moved into center stage. A former educator and college dean, she was elected the second president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. From the outset, quilts and domestic symbols were part of her organizing strategy, banners that brought home into the world of politics.
We are chopping at the whiskey tree. Chop, 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 chop.
We adopted a symbol of white ribbon, emblematic of purity and peace. For the first time, women have grasped hands, inscribing their banners with the motto of the crusade, for God and home and native land.
In the next 20 years, Willard would lead thousands of middle-class housewives, wives of ministers, doctors, and businessmen, out of the home and into the political arena. The chapters of the WCTU made up a nationwide network of women, powerful enough that even without the vote they could influence social reform. From the Temple, their national headquarters in Chicago, members published their own newspaper. Under Willard's leadership, they allied themselves with the emerging labor movement and lobbied for an 8-hour workday and equal pay for equal work.
King Alcohol has many forms by which he catches men. He is a beast of many horns, and ever thus has been. For there's rum and gin and beer and wine and brandy.
Blue and white were the colors of the WCTU. Loyal women made quilts that pledged them to the movement. Quilts with T's for temperance, the temperance goblet,
Oh, are not these a fiendish crew as ever a mortal knew?
drunkard's path,
These a fiendish crew as ever a mortal knew. King Alcohol is very sly, a liar from the first. He'll make you drink until you're dry, then drink because you thirst. Oh, are not these a fiendish crew as ever a mortal?
This quilt contained a square of a different color for each state. It hung in graceful folds, a banner. At a signal, every woman rose to sing the hymn that started the movement in Hillsboro, Ohio.
We great dumb house to the air around with his voices in days gone by. When our fathers marched to its stirring sound with the courage to do or die. Let the tyrants rum near the road.
Willard presented the Crusade quilt with much pomp and circumstance as a memorial to the women of Hillsboro, each block made by an Ohio chapter of the WCTU.
The Women's Christian Temperance Union was never weak, but it is a giant now.
Willard called on the WCTU's to launch a worldwide petition drive. She organized missionary women in 50 countries to collect 7 million signatures on a petition to abolish the drug and alcohol trade. In 1893, the polyglot petition was exhibited at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and women honored Willard as one of the outstanding women of the century.
Upon my knees, there was born upon my mind, from loftier regions, I believe, the declaration, you are to speak for woman's ballot as a weapon of protection to her home.
With her leadership at its peak, Willard moved to bring the suffrage issue into the fold of the WCTU. In the Pacific Northwest, Abigail Duniway continued to work tirelessly for suffrage. She introduced bill after bill in Oregon, but it was not until 1914 that she finally shepherded a suffrage amendment through the legislature.
The women have leaped from their spheres. They've taken the notion to speak for themselves. They are wielding the tongue and the pen.
At 79, this woman who had crossed the plains in a covered wagon before Oregon was even a state became its first female voter.
I am not retired yet. I am still working to bring equal suffrage to every part of the United States.
Toward the end of her life, Duniway unpacked a quilt made from millinery scraps and donated it to raise money for a suffrage candidate. Before Frances Willard died, she dreamed of writing a novel about a woman who led a complete social revolution and was elected President of the United States. Ordinary women of the 19th century also had a vision that transcended the limitations of their lives. Every quilt they have left us is a testimony to the creative spirit, a gift of hearts and hands.
June.